without further ado, I'm going to switch it over to Andrew. Andrew is the Director of Planning and Parks and has done some truly amazing restoration work that I've just been really impressed by across Ozaukee County. And that's why we asked him to be here today. And I'm really glad he agreed. So I'm going to switch it over right after a brief pause to Andrew.
Thanks, Jen. Hopefully everybody can hear me now. Yeah?
Yep,
Good.
I can hear you.
And hopefully you can see my screen. I'm just going to get the slideshow up here in just a second. I did notice, just for everybody, I did notice I have a slight delay on my slides, so I will try and keep note of that as I'm going through them here, but hopefully, there we go. Should all be seeing a full slide now?
Yep, looks great.
Great, okay. Well, thanks again for inviting me tonight. Over the last couple of months, I've been working with Jennifer and others on a number of projects, but we started really talking about Mineral Springs Creek and how we might partner up with Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. So I'm going to share with you tonight work we've actually been doing for several years on kind of an unknown creek. For some of you, right in your own backyard, Mineral Springs Creek, and I'll show you where that is. But it's a very nice creek, and we're hoping to do, well, we've done a number of projects on that creek, and we hope to do some others. So as we're going here, I thought I'd just give you a brief background about our Ecological division in the Planning and Parks Department, which also has our fish passage program. So since about 2009, we've been able to garner about $17.5 million in ecologically focused funding for Ozaukee County. A good chunk of that, a little over half, has been towards the development of our Ozaukee Fish Passage program, which has always had the mission to reconnect high quality habitat in Lake Michigan Basin and the Milwaukee River watershed, really by removing impediments. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but you can see on the right-hand side there that kind of two common impediments. Culverts, which you might not think of, perch culverts, where there is very little access for aquatic life, particularly fish, and also excessive velocities are two examples. There's many more. Obviously, the dams on rivers and creeks are an impediment, and sometimes more than an impediment, a barrier in all cases. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've been working to improve aquatic connectivity. We often refer to fish passage, but really we look at it holistic as all aquatic and semi-aquatic organisms, and trying to reestablish that connectivity to existing high quality habitat. And to date, we've removed over 300 impediments and reconnected over 150 miles. So we've been very busy, primarily since 2009. Wanted to talk a little bit about the type of impediments. So we look at impediments both for linear connectivity, so kind of in-stream, provides passability within rivers and streams. So these would be your culverts, your dams, etc., trying to address those. But we've also been working on kind of corridor restoration, where we look at lateral connectivity. So that's providing fish and aquatic life with connectivity to adjacent wetlands and floodplains. Many of these organisms need those for spawning and reproduction. And so much of our work lately has actually been focused on kind of holistic corridor restoration, but we always start with linear connectivity, because first you need kind of that stream connection and corridor. So as this next slide is coming up, this is obviously Ozaukee County, and here in the city of Port Washington, and on the right-hand side is Mineral Springs Creek. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Headwater is actually in Uleo Swamp, for those of you familiar, but this map kind of shows all where the blue dots are past projects that I'm going to talk a little bit about, run through some of the work we've done on Mineral Springs Creek, and that red box is showing kind of our future project. for corridor restoration. And while we're going to be working throughout the Mineral Springs Creek corridor, that is the focus area. So just a little bit more background on Mineral Springs Creek and its location. It's in the Sauk Creek watershed. So Mineral Springs actually drains into Sauk Creek, just about 100 yards from Lake Michigan, the mouth of Lake Michigan. You can see that is the purple colored watershed on the right-hand side map. And Mineral Springs Creek is actually in a really important regionally ecological area. Many of you know that are familiar with Port Washington. There's obviously the harbor, Lake Michigan, and Mineral Springs Creek comes right into that, to the harbor. But just a little bit to the south there, there's the 590 acre Uleo Swamp natural area, and then the other natural areas along the coastline, Fish and Wildlife properties, as well as Lions Den Gorge Nature Preserve, one of our county parks. I have a number of videos, and I'm hoping that they will translate well here. So I wanted to show you first kind of a little aerial view that we were able to get for the Mineral Springs Creek watershed, and I'm going to try and play it. So here we're looking south. The Mineral Springs Creek corridor is kind of right where that lettering came up, the title. You can see how close it is in proximity to Lake Michigan, and for those of you familiar with Port Washington, you know. There's obviously the We Energies power plant, the bird sanctuary, Cold Dock Park, looking off to the east. As we pan around, you can see the harbor and downtown Port Washington. So Mineral Springs, we're kind of backing up now on the corridor. It kind of comes in right by the We Energies power plant. And for a very urban setting, Mineral Springs Creek runs through the industrial park in the city of Port Washington. It actually has a very nice corridor, and I hope to show that to you tonight. But there you can see it in the foreground, kind of an aerial view in proximity to Lake Michigan. So wanted to talk just a little bit more about Mineral Springs. So it's about a 4-mile stream, so it's not super long. And as I mentioned, headwaters at the Uleo Swamp. So it connects to some really high quality wetland habitat, not only at Uleo Swamp, but along the corridor as well, but over 195 acres. So for a short stream, it's got a lot of potential spawning habitat for all kinds of fish, particularly phytophilic spawners, which spawn kind of in wetland areas like northern pike. But it's been impaired by a number of impediments that we've been working on removing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we've also been doing a lot of fisheries monitoring. You can see there in one of the photos, steelhead. So we actually documented now for the first time reproduction of steelhead or trout species in Mineral Springs Creek, which while not a native fish, it is, it's part of the Lake Michigan system now, and important sport fishery. But nonetheless, we have found that it's been productive for a number of species and many native species. So our restoration project aims to work on about 1 mile of that 4-mile corridor, restoring or working towards restoring about 25 acres of adjacent wetland habitat and about 11 acres of floodplain. And we're really focused on the native species. So we're looking at white sucker, red horse, and other natives that need that habitat for spawning and migratory passage from Lake Michigan. And there probably are many, many other forage fish species, natives, that would benefit by the work as well. So we're definitely looking forward to starting a project. So our future project, I'll talk a little bit about that first. Here's some of the project goals and objectives of it, which is really around resiliency. We're working towards funding a coastal resiliency funding, and it's really looking at being able to stabilize and rebuild the stream bed. And I'll talk a little bit more about what happened to the Mineral Springs Creek corridor in just a few years ago. We obviously want to reconnect to those important habitats and provide fish spawning area and rearing particularly for Lake Michigan and Lake Michigan migratory fish. Restore and enhance adjacent habitat, particularly we have a focus on migratory birds, and providing stopover habitat, because it is, while it's in a very urban setting in Port Washington and in the industrial park, it does have actually a very nice intact corridor along that stream. And then we also, the coastal resiliency part also comes into protecting infrastructure from future storm events, and I'll talk more about that. That second bullet, again, just a little bit more detail on kind of some of the habitat restoration that we'd like to do, as well as some of the management for stormwater and providing that or enhancing critical infrastructure. So this next slide actually shows you an aerial photo as it comes up here, hopefully. Shows you an aerial photo of the Mineral Springs Creek corridor, and you can see a number of numbers and also the red boxes. So those are kind of our focus areas for both our past projects and our current projects. And I'm going to work from upstream, where you see number 1 there in the lower left-hand corner, work through a series of projects and take you downstream. So each one of these numbered sites you'll see on future slides. And I'll walk you through upstream to downstream of the corridor. This is that focus area of the roughly 1 mile. It obviously goes up in headwaters in Uleo Swamp though. So at the upstream end of our past work, and also hopefully our future work on the corridor, is Park Street. So those of you that are familiar with the city of Port Washington, South Park Street, we did some work, and I'll talk about that. And we also, that is kind of the top end of our future work as well, our corridor project. But historically at Park Street, as you can see in the photo here, there was 4 barrel culverts providing significant impediment to fish passage. It was oftentimes those culverts, the flow was too diffuse and spread out, and so it was actually a low flow barrier. In other words, there wasn't enough water for fish passage. The culverts were all structurally failing. They were extremely long culverts. So we undertook a project to remove all of those culverts. It was in conjunction with a private contractor and our county highway department to remove them all and place in a new concrete culvert that was a single culvert. And we actually put some in-stream habitat through that culvert so that the stream corridor through the culvert looked a lot like the stream corridor outside of the culvert, provide some in-stream habitat for fish. And the project, for those of you curious, was just about $225,000. It was actually a fairly large project with a lot of utilities and so forth. So I'll transition from that project at the upstream end to South Ravine Street, and this is kind of where our current efforts are going to be focused. For those of you that are familiar, kind of the corner of Ravine and Western, seen there in your photo. And in 2018, we had, and those of you that are in the city of Port Washington would know this, we had a very significant rainstorm. A little over 9 inches of rain fell in less than 24 hours, which was about a 500-year flood event. So it was very significant. And that flood event actually created significant erosion throughout Mineral Springs Creek. Mineral Springs Creek is still a little bit flashy because of the land use around it. And it was so powerful, it actually scoured the stream bed about 2 to 3 feet down. And so one of the detriments of that was that there are a couple utility crossings across the creek, and one primary one that you see here in the photo was a large sewer main that supplies the industrial park. That sewer main was historically crossing underneath the creek bed, and when the creek bed scoured down, it actually exposed it, and it was hanging above a creek bed, which if you know anything, you don't want a sewer main, especially that size, unsupported from below. So the city of Port Washington undertook some emergency measures to shore up that main sewer line that served the industrial park. But in doing so, unfortunately, it created a fish passage impediment, isolating all of our work at Park Street, the first one I showed you just upstream from here. So kind of negating all that work and that funding, and it created this dam as you see here. What they did basically drove sheet pile on either side of this sewer main and then poured concrete over it, essentially making it impassable. This next slide, you can see it essentially created a dam. And you can see here's a number of fish. I know they're a little hard to see within the rocks, but a number of steelhead and trout and fish that were abandoned that couldn't get over that rock spillway or the dam. And as I mentioned, kind of isolates the whole upper watershed now again back to where it was before we did some of the previous work that we had done on Mineral Springs Creek. So our current project is to remediate this effort. So here's just a video. Oh, I guess it's not playing yet. Here's a video of that utility corridor and the dam as we get to it here. And you'll see it goes then through a bridge, which is, it's actually a bottomless culvert technically, but so that itself is not a fish passage barrier. You can see that there's some infrastructure issues with the culvert or bridge itself that need to be repaired. But the passage is good through the culvert as far as aquatic life is concerned. But there is obviously some additional infrastructure issues there. So as this next slide comes up, just talk a little bit about our restoration project activities. As I mentioned, we want to restore that stream channel, which is about 400 linear feet, by basically raising that stream bed up again so that there isn't a drop at that utility corridor or that dam that I just showed. And obviously we'd be doing a lot of modeling for fish passage. So we want to make that slope passable by most fish during most circumstances. But in addition to that, we want to fix the stream corridor and the in-stream habitat and make it passable for fish, but we are also looking at this more comprehensively by restoring the corridor, because we know that that storm event also created a lot of significant erosion, which I'll show in upcoming slides. So we're looking at doing some vegetation restoration within the corridor specifically, but then also hopefully in Oakland Green Park, so where we can, adjacent to the corridor, we can provide some upstream or upland habitat as well. And all of this is in an effort to continue to strengthen partnerships, and particularly like the neighborhood partnership that Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory has, work with volunteers and get people involved in some of this community restoration work. This next slide, I'm working downstream now as it comes up here. So this is kind of site 3. So another part of our funding request has been to protect critical infrastructure. So that's both public, like the sewer main I mentioned, but also private infrastructure. So there are a number of existing buildings immediately along the Mineral Springs Creek corridor, the parking lot you see there, private business. And so we want to make sure that those sites are protected too, because with that storm, we had significant erosion of the banks. And hopefully this video will work here in just a minute. So this is at site 3. This is kind of showing the aftermath. We had significant bank erosion that really tore out a lot of the vegetation, made unstable steep banks through this site. You can see the significance of it there. That's one of our interns. She's only 5 feet, but still a super high bank. You can see it scoured right underneath all the vegetation. So part of our work will be to restore that corridor habitat as well. Working our way downstream as this next slide comes up, this is both a current effort and a previous effort. So our previous effort actually was a dam removal at this site. You can see in the lower left-hand corner the dam just before we removed it. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about that, the historical significance. So Mineral Springs Creek is actually really interesting. The creek itself, they used to actually bottle water out of Mineral Springs Creek and sell it. There was actually a bottling plant at the south end of the street. The building is still there actually in the city of Port Washington. They used to bottle water, but they also used it. You can see here in that historic photo of the dam, it doesn't look anything like this now, of course, but where that parking lot was that I showed you, they used to dam up the creek and create a large impoundment, and they used to use that for ice blocks to put the fish on. So it supported all the fishermen in the port coming in with their fish, Back then they didn't have refrigeration, so they would cut ice blocks out of the dammed water. So that's why the dam was there originally. Obviously, it hasn't functioned in that capacity in many, many years. You can see on the lower right-hand corner, the dam had been failing over many, many years, although it was still a significant barrier to fish passage, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner. All those dark shadows are fish that can't pass, primarily coho and chinook salmon, but many other species wouldn't be able to pass as well. And I just have a little video to demonstrate that not only was there a dam, but a large concrete pan that took the force of the water coming over the dam. Oops, that one didn't play. Let me see if I can go back to it here. Give me 1 second. Hopefully I can get this one to play. So it has a large concrete pan, and you can see that that's problematic even for the strongest swimming fish. This is some Chinook salmon and trout trying to make their way up not only what's remaining of the dam, but also that concrete pan. So we worked towards removing that to restore the aquatic connectivity. I apologize, I think the video is a little bit slow here, but hopefully you get the picture. So it was a significant impediment. These salmon are some of the strongest swimming fish, so we know if they can't pass, most everything else is not going to pass either. And so often when we talk about impediments like this as barriers, they're almost complete barriers to aquatic passage. So just real quick on that dam removal, we should get to a summary slide here in a second. We did a full dam removal and restored the corridor. This was actually done. We did the design and engineering, and then our highway department actually did the demolition and restoration work, and this was done in 2016. The project was very cost effective at $85,000. Very few dam removals you'll find that cost that little, and this was a significant one. But we've found that using our highway department has actually been extremely cost effective, and you can see here some of the funders and the stream corridor as it existed after our restoration work there on the bottom. And I just had another video here coming up. I'll try and play this one too. I won't probably let it go the full length. But I thought it would, whoops, it didn't work. Let me see if I can go back. I thought it would be interesting if you can see this. This is how you remove a dam, kind of brute force. We actually just chipped away at the dam. Fortunately, it was significantly compromised already. But it was a high dam. Originally, I think it was a 14-foot dam. And you could see from those historic photos. So this is our highway department doing some of that deconstruction work. You can see in the back the excavator, maybe you can see in the back there, working on the channel and the restoration work that we did. I'm gonna jump into another video right away here. Hopefully it'll transition. And this video just shows kind of even after removal of the dam, this is going to show kind of the downstream end. So this is the end of our project as this video pans downstream here, and you can see that there's significant scour below the dam. Unfortunately, we didn't have funding at that time to address that. And then this just shows again coming up out of the trees here, proximity to the downtown in Lake Michigan. You can see the We Energies power plant there in the background. And this is coming back down with our drone footage here, looking upstream at the same site, that private infrastructure that I talked about. So I'm going to keep moving on downstream to Site 5 here. And this is just part of what we hope to work on is some of that severe erosion that again occurred along the stream corridor. And again, just a video tour of that stretch of the stream. So this is below the dam. Some of this erosion had happened prior to that storm event in 2018, but some of it happen during that event. You can see steep, high scour banks that we hope to work on restoration for. And there's also some city infrastructure that comes into Mineral Springs Creek, and we want to try and address that too. So you'll see here coming up as we pan along the side of the bank, I think you'll be able to see not only the downstream in, but there's the stormwater pipe that comes into Mineral Springs Creek. So trying to do a little bit better addressing of that stormwater as it comes into the creek so we can protect the creek corridor as well. And then keep on moving downstream, section 6 here, if you will. And this is an area of actually some really interesting wetland area. This is actually a particularly nice place to go birding. There's some really interesting habitat down here. So there is some adjacent wetlands that we hope to do some restoration efforts on. There's actually a tributary stream that comes into Mineral Springs Creek, and I'll show you that in a minute here, but I'm just showing the next slide here is just a video of that wetland site. So we're looking at Mineral Springs Creek, and it's going to pan over just a short area here and show the adjacent wetlands. So under high flows, the stream corridor is connected to those wetlands, providing for spawning habitat. And while there are invasives and other things in there, something that we hope to work on and improve, there is also some really good vegetation within that corridor, some native dogwood, and some other species that have a high conservation value that we hope to protect. So very interesting what exists right in the backyard there in that very urban corridor. So we hope to do some of the wetland restoration work in that area. And then moving down further, this is what I mentioned. There's a tributary stream that comes in just below that wetland complex, a tributary to Mineral Springs Creek. And again, just going to show you a little video of that, where that tributary stream comes in. And we want to do some work there because this is also a great area for spawning habitat. You can see there the riprap on the left-hand corner, that goes up to Oakland Green Park, just to give you a little perspective of where you are in the stream corridor. But overall, you can see it's a very nice stream corridor. And we've found that Mineral Springs Creek is extremely productive from a fishery standpoint. And then keep moving on downstream. This is Site 8. So this was a site adjacent to Oakland Green Park. So this is both previous and future efforts. So some of our previous efforts were to remove a number of log jams, significant log jams. We don't like to take woody debris out of the stream because it provides good habitat, but when it actually creates an impediment is when we do the removal. So in this case, we actually worked with the DNR warden, you can see there, and a big group of Trouts Unlimited, and they helped us actually chainsaw up and remove some of these really significant log debris jams. We also, just a little bit down at Division Street, worked on restoring a culvert for passage. So you can see that little bit of lip there. Our native fish don't jump, and they are not strong swimmers with high velocities, and in this case, you can see the diverse stream flow because it's spread between two culverts. So a lot of times the flow is so thin they can't get up either. So the restoration on the right, so that's a before and after, you can see we filled in the scour hole, and so there's no longer a lip on the culvert. And if you look real closely into the culvert, you can see we put what's called some ballast. They're actually curb stops to create a little low flow channel so that the flow can get concentrated and provide enough depth for fish passage upstream. So this is at Division Street, work that we previously did. And this next one is a video just showing what we hope to do future work on. It's just showing proximity of that corridor to Oakland Green Park, which is a nice lawn area, but we're hoping to work with the city and Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory to do some restoration work here to make it better habitat for upland and migratory species of birds and semi-aquatic life. Here you can see we hope to improve some of the public access from Oakland Green down to the stream corridor. This is kind of self-made trail and bridge there. We hope to do some improvements on that public access, but as this next slide will show, what we're hoping to do in Oakland Green Park is some native prairie restoration work, native prairie plantings, hopefully get in some bluebird nest boxes. And I need to talk to Jen about the extras that she has. But we hope to do some restoration here, and I think it's a great opportunity, and the city seems willing to work with us on that as well, and would provide a great buffer to that stream corridor. In addition to the prairie work up in the grassed area of Oakland Green, we also hope to work on tree planting along the entire corridor, so not just at Oakland Green, but along the whole corridor. And we've done similar work like this with volunteers, youth conservation corps groups, and other partner groups like Uleo Creek Partnership. This is an example at Uleo Creek where we've done a lot of tree planting and habitat restoration, and we hope to do the same thing through the Mineral Springs Creek corridor. And the goal behind that, I think many of you will appreciate, is really to increase our bird stopover and breeding habitat along this corridor. It is a good corridor, but it's impaired by a number of things, and we certainly think we can do better. And it's in such an important area, as I mentioned, regionally, with all those other ecological sites. So it can provide really, even though small, it can provide a really important stopover habitat, and for some species, breeding habitat. And then I'm going to move down to kind of our last focus area site, or second last focus area site. So a couple of years back, we worked with We Energies. The downstream end of Mineral Springs Creek goes by the power plant, and they put in a relief creek, or a dam, if you will. And you can see it there in the lower left-hand corner. What happened is when not even under significantly high flows, even at modest flows, the creek would get diverted because the bed was filling in below the dam. The sediment was falling out at this dam because it was right on a turn, and it was a grading, or it was filling in, and so the water would spill out over the spillway, which was only intended to spill during heavy flood events. But what's happening is that it was actually going over that even in a 2 or 3 year storm event, which isn't all that significant, just a regular rainfall. It was going over, and what that was happening is the lower part of the stream corridor was basically dry, completely dry, because everything was going out the diversion. So we worked with We Energies to create a new bypass channel that was not on a turn where all the sediment and materials would drop out, which also is saving them a significant amount of dollars in maintenance activities. So we created, for those of you familiar with City of Port Washington, you've probably seen it, but we've created a separate diversion channel that actually follows the old stream channel before it was diverted for the power plant and the overflow. We created a new stream channel that can actually hold the base flow of the creek without filling in, so we don't get the same impairment. So this video will show you that stream corridor as it exists today. It's holding that base flow. You can see We Energies is still doing some work here on the power poles and stuff. So this is another site where you hope to do some upland restoration with prairie plantings. But you can see that stream corridor is much better now. There's a base flow that runs all the way down through the passage underneath the street there. And this is the overflow that I was talking about. It's dry like it should be, except under major storm events to protect the power plant. But we can keep and maintain a base flow all the way down along the power plant through this really nice habitat. And again, so under low flows, that does not become a barrier now. And the last site, most downstream, is the confluence with Sauk Creek. And the whole thought about working on Mineral Springs Creek started with the City of Port Washington's efforts at Cold Oak Park, and actually the removal of this significantly perched culvert you can see in the lower left-hand corner. This was done as part of the Cold Oak restoration, and it was the impetus for us to work on all the rest of the work upstream with the dam, etc. That was a significant passage barrier. Nothing got by it, and basically shut off all of Mineral Springs Creek, which, by the way, in historic documents, there were huge runs of white suckers up Mineral Springs Creek, so we know it was historically very productive. And there you can see what the city of Port Washington did. They fully removed it, put in a new wooden bridge, and that access and aquatic connectivity is much better now. And this next one is just going to show you a video of that most downstream end and the confluence with Sauk Creek. That new entrance, which is so much better than the old culvert. And again, you can look upstream to Sauk Creek here, which also provides habitat. As I showed in that first slide with the watershed, Sauk Creek's a very big watershed, and Mineral Springs Creek is part of that. So I just, with this nearing the end here, I just wanted to provide you again an overview of the Mineral Springs Creek corridor. We got some really great drone footage, and this again just shows you that corridor coming up from the top end, looking down. So there are some significant industrial plants and stuff, but if you follow that wooded path down, that's Mineral Springs Creek corridor. It's proximity to Lake Michigan and the power plant. It really is a hidden gem, and something that we hope to bring back to its former prominence and importance with the fisheries, but also hopefully make some improvements with the upland habitat along that corridor as well. We've worked with a number of partners on the previous work here, all outlined in blue, and we hope to work with some new partners like Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory, and also the newly formed Ozaukee County Watershed Coalition. So we're really excited about continuing this work and making Mineral Springs everything it can be. And with that, I'm glad to take questions. This last slide just shows many of our funding partners that have helped with this work over the many years that we've been working on Mineral Springs. And we hope to hear about a large grant through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, hopefully positive news to continue that work that I outlined. So with that, I'm glad to take any questions, and thanks so much for the invite and the time tonight.
Thanks, Andrew. So we have one question, and I really hope other people take on this opportunity to ask more questions. But Diana is asking, what was the initial concern that brought on this active project?
Yeah, I would say again that it really started when well, we knew that Mineral Springs Creek was historically a good fisheries, so we had a lot of data on that, and we were doing comprehensive fish passes throughout the county. So Mineral Springs Creek was on our radar, but what started to make it really possible is the work that the city of Port Washington did at Coal Dock Park and removing that first significant downstream culvert. Once they did that, we started seeking funding, and the next big one was the dam removal, but everything in between. So we knew that, and since that time we've been doing ongoing fisheries monitoring and have just demonstrated, just like Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory has done monitoring for birds and showing habitat improvement, and with the neighborhood habitat improvement project, we've seen that improvement with the fisheries. So, but yeah, it was kind of having an inventory, knowing that Mineral Springs Creek was important, but really that first City of Port Washington culvert project kicked off the rest of this work.
That's really great. The next question is, what is a concrete pan?
Yeah, good question. So it is poured concrete that is in the stream bed, and it's usually poured at the downstream end of a dam so that the dam doesn't scour a big hole into the stream bed. So it's how else can I describe it? It's basically a concrete floor. They pave over the bed of the stream to protect it from that downstream force of the dam. So that in and of itself was a significant barrier.
Diana is asking, what are similar projects that are on the wait list?
Other creeks or on Mineral Springs Creek?
I'm not sure, but let's start with Mineral Springs Creek and then maybe other creeks that you have your eye on.
Sure. So, well, Mineral Springs Creek, I kind of outlined what we want to do is rebuild that stream bed and address that current impediment, the dam structure that was put in with the utility crossing. So that's our first and foremost and our primary. We have some existing funding through the DNR to help make that happen, but we're looking to get additional funding. We are working on streams throughout the whole county. I think we're somewhere around 24 streams now, but we have an active project on Mole Creek, which is the only potential cold water stream in Ozaukee County. It runs through Saukville and it enters into the Milwaukee River. So we have an ongoing corridor restoration there where we're actually remeandering the stream. We have some smaller culvert projects working on a number of smaller tributary streams. And we continue work on Uleo Creek, which is just south of Mineral Springs.
Very cool. Let's see. What kind of plants are being used to prevent erosion of creek banks?
That's a very good question and something we're going to be experimenting on with this. That's a significant ravine and significantly steep bank. So one of the things we're going to be doing, first of all, is doing a little bit of grading to the extent we can, but it is a tight corridor, so they're still going to be steeper than we would prefer banks. We're going to try and use some deep-rooted structures, deep-rooted plants like prairie species where there is sun openings, but a lot of it is wooded and shaded corridor. So we're actually looking at putting in some tree and canopy structure at the top of the bank, but on the bank itself, kind of doing live staking. So some dogwoods, some willows, some other shrub species that hopefully we can get started well by doing live staking, which is basically just taking a live cutting. And it's also a cost-effective way and a great thing for volunteers to help with.
Sounds great. Let's see. What kind of work would an intern do on this kind of project?
An intern? We have our interns doing everything. Actually, there's a joke in our department that says if we have an intern, we can remove a dam. But seriously, our interns help us with a lot of, for some of them, they have some background in schooling in fisheries, and so they help us do a lot of the monitoring. So we do what's called larval trapping. We actually catch young of the year and identify them. You saw a lot of those small fish in hands. Those are some of our interns' hands doing the fish identification. We also do what's called electrofishing. It sounds worse than it is. It actually just stuns the fish so we can get them. So this is how we monitor adult fish in the stream. So our interns help with monitoring. They help with construction oversight. They'll take photos. They help produce some of the video work here. Actually, they help us with inventory impediments on streams, and also with all the vegetation restoration, working with volunteers, whole host of things. We put them to work.
Let's see. How are you actively restoring plants for birds?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I mean, two primary things. So where we have, that the Oakland green site, we're hoping to have, an open area transition from grass to some prairie species. So we know that it's still going to be a small site it's not going to, host grassland birds per se, maybe with the exception of bluebirds and things like that. But we know that when we do that native grass restoration, we also increase the insect population. That's good for aquatic species. It just provides that food web. So where we have sunny spots, we're going to be doing native prairie restoration, warm season prairie, if you will, grasses and forbs. We also know it's great for pollinators, something I know the neighborhood have projects working on. So even short of birds, all the pollinators that use that type of habitat, even in the small scale. And then definitely we want to keep the corridor wooded. It's traditionally been wooded. It helps keep the stream cool. It helps moderate that temperature. And so we hope to put in a lot of native species. Right now, in a lot of our restoration projects, we're somewhere around 15 to 20 native tree species, and then probably a dozen more shrub species that we use. So
that's great. And I guess in case people aren't familiar with the connection, a lot of our birds eat emergent insects. So insects that spend most of their life or their larval stages as aquatic larvae metamorphosize into dragonflies and mayflies and all of those kind of things. So even things that you don't think of as depending on aquatic systems, a lot of our birds do. So water quality is all connected as well.
Absolutely. I would just add to that. For those of you who are wondering when those hatches occur of the aquatic organism, just watch the fishermen, because that's when the fish are also biting, is when you get those larger aquatic insect hatches.
Let's see. The last question so far, so keep sending questions if you have them, is what do you mean by a cold stream?
Yeah, thanks. So cold water stream is a different fishery community. First of all, it usually supports things like trout, native trout, like brook trout, brown trout. And it has basically a temperature regime that's cool to cold water. So it's basically an overall cooler water stream. Like I said, it supports a different fisheries. They're a little bit less diverse, but equally as important, as opposed to a warm water fisheries, which is traditionally what we have in Ozaukee County. Supports a warm water fisheries, different aquatic life. So other than trout, there are a number of cold water fish species that only exist. So this is pretty far south for a cold water stream, just because of the temperature regimes. And the reason Mole Creek has that potential is because there is significant groundwater feeding it for base flow. And so Mole Creek, it is very close in proximity to the Cedarburg Bog and that whole groundwater dynamic. So that's how we get that cool water, is a significant groundwater contribution.
Very cool. I didn't think we had cold water streams this far south, so I learned something.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, we have another one. Robert's from Ontario, and his local conservation authority sometimes has to decline projects because they have a backlog of projects. Have you ever had this issue? And what can citizens or environmental bodies do to possibly get the process started?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things we're doing, I didn't really mention a lot of it. I mean, I didn't talk about the history of our fish pasture program, but it's pretty unique to have a county involved in kind of fish and aquatic restoration work. But there are other counties. Door County is doing some work up in the Green Bay area. There's some counties doing some work. But one of the things we're trying to do is share all of our information with other counties so that they can get started and know. It all starts with being able to inventory and having some expertise to do that inventory of the stream corridors. But the other one with this slide up, the other obvious one is getting funding. And so we spend a significant portion of our time generating funding. Most of it is outside grant funding that comes from state, federal, private sources, in-kind contributions. We look to everything. So that's a driver. I would also say, I think in one of my slides it said, don't turn your back to even what you think is not an important stream, because we've seen ditches, literally ditches, grassed ditches in Green Bay being in really critical, important corridors for northern pike spawning to get to those spawning wetlands. So just because you don't see water in a stream corridor year round, and just because it's not always there, there might be still an important critical connection at certain times. Northern pike spawn soon as ice out, so in March. So don't turn your back to any stream corridors. Keep it alive with your county boards, your elected officials. Make sure they know, that streams are important to you. And yeah, we're trying to help other counties with kind of that inventory work and some of the expertise that we've gained over the last couple of years.
That's great. Any other questions, anybody? Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to. But if not, I'd just like to thank Andrew one last time. I learned a lot, and I live in Port, and I love Mineral Springs, and I still learned a lot. So thank you a ton, and everybody will hopefully see you in a few months.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.